So let's get into the algae bloom aspect of it. And I bring this up because prior to the hurricane that hit Florida, there was a major red tide.
We'll talk about that.
Okay, but it's where it's coming from. That's where this derived from, the algae bloom. And we've had guests on the program that's talked about algae bloom and the devastational effects that it has on the environment. So first of all, let's go with what algae bloom is here.
Okay, so here's what happens. Algae bloom is excessive nutrients from soaps, fertilizers, etc. So anything that has a high nitrogen or phosphorus content, it's running off from different things.
It's runoff.
It's runoff.
Over applications
so it can run
and
off
instances.
from crops. It can run off from if you have a septic system. It can run off from a lot of things. And it's running off into large bodies of water, not limited to Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes, and then also even the ocean. And a lot of times what happens is that it runs off from the ocean or from the Mississippi River into the Gulf.
Which is a dead zone now.
Right.
And you can go on your favorite search and type in Gulf of Mexico dead zone, and you can see the progression of over the last 30 to 40 years, how it's progressively gotten deader.
So that's why they've taken a lot of things out of soaps, but it's still not gone.
Well, first of all, when we talk about nitrogen and phosphorus, that is the first two numbers that are on a fertilizer bag. You'll see three numbers, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. When we talk about those two, that's the first two numbers. Now, obviously, your bar soap at home doesn't have a NPK level on it. But again, that's what we're referencing when we talk about high nitrogen or high phosphorus level.
A lot of times it's in things like laundry soap, dish soap, especially the cheaper stuff. It's got that. I don't know what it is.
It's in everything.
It's in everything, but right. It's in those two main things because they're not water soluble, but they rinse. They have like rinsing agents in them. So what happens is, especially in Lake Michigan, there's actually a huge dead zone in Green Bay area, like right in the bay of the Green Bay. So that's there as well. They're finding it also in parts of along the lake in Manitowoc and Sheboygan.
Right, and this is not just.
But they feel that's mostly from farms.
Well, true, and I'll tell a story.
And also, there's this map that the DNR has where it shows how your water runs off and what basin it runs off to, and surprisingly, a lot of Milwaukee's water runs off actually more towards. Not like immediate Milwaukee, but the western part runs off more towards the Mississippi River. But then as you go north, it runs off more towards Lake Michigan. So
there's something online that kind of tells you where this flow is typical. Okay. So I'll tell you, and it's not just to Lake Michigan or the Great Lakes or the coast of Florida, the red tide, or the Gulf of Mexico. This is prevalent in many normal, ordinary farm ponds.
Right.
On the farm, grew up on a farm, for those who are not familiar with that, in southern Illinois, and we had a tremendous amount of problem with algae in the spring. Now, the way ponds typically fill in a farmland situation, landscape, is fields drain into basins, which are, the farmers figured out, okay, this is the low spot, we're going to dig a pond here. So the fields have what is called waterways, which is a designated grass area that is never tilled or planted, and it kind of filters the water and guides it to the pond to where it doesn't, what we call, wash out or cut ditches in the field. This is a permanent area where it kind of like a ditch in a roadside, but not to that depth or extreme level. So in the spring, what happens in the spring on farms? Crops get planted, fertilizer gets applied. Spring rains. A lot of that water washes the fertilizer, whether it's liquid and or granular, through that waterway or water basin and then into the pond. And then that's where algae bloom begins. So farmers will, if it's just for animal watering, it's not a big deal. But if they use that water to pump to other aspects or other applications on the farm, then that algae can actually affect pipes, pumps, that type of thing. So they have to go in there and figure out some way to remove it. And they do apply chemicals, or in some instances, to kill that algae. They also there are fish that you can put in your pond that is designed, that will eat the algae. and it can be an organic or an inorganic means in order to get rid of the algae. Now, when you put chemicals in a pond and you're pumping that water to water animals, there is a certain toxicity which the animals can still sustain life, but it still kills like we eat food every day, it's got toxicities in it, and we're okay. That type of background of it. So what we would do on the farm is in the spring, once the algae bloom developed, we would go ahead and throw granular item. It's a granular type fertilizer material. It's not fertilizer, but it's a granular item that dissolves and eats away the algae. It kills the algae. And I'm not really sure the science behind why it does what it does, but that's what farmers would do.
Right. So that is a good explanation on a smaller scale, essentially. So what happens is there's red tide, and what it is it's affecting portions of the coast of Florida. It's mostly in Florida because it's part of that Gulf area. And what it is it's just because of the toxins, because of the phosphorus and the nitrate. And it's actually causing fish to die, respiratory irritation, and then sea turtles, manatees, birds, and dolphins are all getting choked out by this.
Now, is it because the birds and the dolphins are eating the fish that have that toxicity in it? Is that the chain of command there? Yeah. And it's not just a few fish. You can go online. It's tonnage and megatons of fish that are being, the tide's bringing up on the shore. And we've got, and before the hurricane, this was a very big deal.
But they don't think it's going to be gone.
No,
either.
And that was the thing. People said, they asked these scientists, and scientists don't, They don't know everything. They said, will this fix the problem, this hurricane? It's either going to fix it or make it a whole lot worse. Now, anything in life that you do, whenever the answer is, well, that medicine's either going to fix it or make you a whole lot worse, that's not the answer that you're hoping for anything.
Well, but this is where we are in the world.
Yes.
So at this point, yeah, scientists can only figure so much stuff out, predict so much, but it's on us, really.
And it's not just the last 6 years, last 8 years.
This has been going on for decades.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of things in which we do in life, we don't see the initial effects of it today, tomorrow, next year, 2 years from now, 15, 20, 30 years from now. We start seeing what we didn't think would be affected decades ago. And a lot of times, and this is just my personal opinion, a lot of times it's all derived from, we can make money by doing this now. Forget about what it's going to do, what the effects will be 15, 20 years from now. I can make buku dollars now, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's about right. And if we don't, it also comes down to the fact that, don't want to get political, but we have politicians that don't recognize this either.
On both sides.
On both sides.
Both sides, let's be fair now.
No, on both sides. Yep. And the problem is that we're also not teaching necessarily future generations the importance of how you're treating the planet.
Right.
Yeah.
With all the plastic in the ocean, all that. But that's getting off the topic here of the algae bloom.
Right. Well, algae bloom is a result of how humans affect the environment.
Right. So with the algae bloom, many people are listening going, okay, great. It's all this is happening. Nothing I can do now to fix the problem. Or is there?
Essentially, it would just be a fact of things like not using those fertilizers.
Overuse
of fertilizers. And so proper use is good.
It still does affect proper use because it's runoff. The inorganic fertilizer bonds itself to water molecules, and water molecules go to basins of ponds, lakes, streams, rivers, and oceans.
Yes.
Even though we can do it moderately, there is still an effect that occurs.
There's gonna be an effect no matter what. But being aware of that is what's important. Another thing is growing in ways that you reduce runoff. So, like we use the raised berms, that can help reduce runoff. You can also...
And raised berms are designated slightly elevated areas of grow space where we plant, and then there's designated walk paths. And some people have what is called swells, which are larger... Kind of like
bioswales.
Right, which to explain it to a way that is understandable, it's like a ditch that's exploded. It's a hill that catches the water, that gradually directs it in a certain direction and allows it to absorb into that mound of soil or dirt rather than just very quickly flushing off of the property or down a stream and eroding the areas in which it's going across. The swell slows it down, allows the opportunity for that soil to soak in, and in the instance of the fertilizer, it allows that fertilizer to absorb into that soil, that hill, rather than flushing itself down the ditch and going that way.
Right. So that is definitely one thing. I haven't found out if it's not really reversible. And that's...
Well, a lot of the environmental issues in which are things that humans have done is not really fixable to a certain level.
Right. That's definitely for sure. So basically, that's one thing. You can, I guess, on a smaller level, it's not really, it would be reversible over time. Mm-hmm. So if we control what we're putting out there.
Starting today,
it would take years,
mm-hmm. decades.
But over time, eventually, that algae bloom would reduce, the plants would start to regenerate, the fish would start to reproduce. It does, the sun on the water helps it grow, but it can also help it dry out too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, that being said, algae bloom, terrible thing that we're experiencing, not only in the Great Lakes, the rivers, the waterways, the Gulf of Mexico, and having problems with that is affecting everything that we do, because it affects, like I talked about with the ponds and the pond and the pumps, it starts to clog and has ill effects on the equipment that we use as well.